Hello, welcome everybody. Really excited to talk about how finance leaders are rethinking global spend. Today, I am joined by Liz Herbert from Forrester, as well as my colleague, Erica Dorfman. Um, and we are very excited to talk about this from the perspective of global spend management, and in particular, how the buying criteria have changed over the years and the global workforce has become increasingly important. So Elizabeth is a principal analyst at Forrester. Erica is director of product management here at Brex, and I am Brex's newest board member. And so I'm really excited to help host today's webinar. We're going to first, Forrester has conducted a survey on spend management and some of the buying criteria, one of which is global and global capabilities. And then we're going to talk about why those global spend capabilities are a competitive advantage for companies, and also provide a checklist for navigating the future of spend management. So thank you all for joining, and I will turn it over to Liz.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. And hi, everybody. Liz Herbert, an analyst at Forrester for over 20 years now. And I've had the opportunity to work with clients around the world and in a lot of industries on a variety of enterprise software purchases around particularly front and back office software and some of the related services that go along with those. So with that, I wanted to first share with you a bit of data before I get into this new study. I wanted to share some of the broader Forrester data that we have around what is top of mind. And a couple things I would call out here. First of all, we are still in a climate where growth matters a lot. Some industries, some countries obviously have more shakiness than others and might be more or less concerned about cost control and profit. But you can see that the overtone of the investment areas is growth. You do see, though, that reduced costs also matters, as it always does. And so we see that companies are trying to be very smart about how they spend their dollars, whether those are technology dollars or other types of spend, from salaries to travel to devices and home offices and more. And I'd also call out on this data here that the perspectives are quite different if you look at what the executives are thinking about versus the people in charge of buying and managing technology. That's common. We see that in a lot of our surveys, but that's another thing to keep in mind here. All right. Another thing I wanted to show you, we get a lot of questions around what's the macro climate of technology spend. As I mentioned, most people are, thoughtful about dollars that they're spending, and they want to make sure they're getting a good ROI. But the overall economic climate that we predict for technology spend, especially in software, is positive. So you can see on our chart on the left here, we're predicting low double-digit growth in software spend. And we expect that will continue for the next several years. Again, your miles may vary. We know working with our clients that it can be pretty different depending on your specific business situation, what industry you're in, and other pressures or opportunities you might be facing. We also know that for some organizations, growth matters more than cost control, that growth is really a mandate and an imperative. In fact, one of the things we've been working on as Forrester is this idea of high performance IT, with the idea that your technology needs and what high performance means for you is very individual. So please take this all as just aggregate and overall information that we have here. Okay, great. Well, with that, I am going to move into sharing some highlights of this recent study that we did around spend management. So just a few points about this study that we recently wrapped up. The overall focus is on spend management around the globe. And we went into this with a hypothesis that companies would be looking at, better experiences, more personalized experiences, technologies that can really support them in multiple geographies to really achieve their business goals. And in this overall study, as you can see here, we were able to survey over 300 different companies, and we targeted people a bit more senior who have some decision-making authority. And I'll share a lot more about the findings, but just to preview what some of these findings are, we did find that spend management is one of those critical enablers of business success. In fact, spend management sits at that unique intersection where it has the potential both to drive growth, it can contribute to the right kinds of actions and activities that drive your growth, but obviously is an important way and an important element of keeping control of your costs, very directly related to keeping control of your costs as well. All right, so let me go forward here and share with you some of the findings. More findings are available in the full study, but I'll preview some of the highlights that we found here. So first of all, we found that operational efficiency is critical. When we looked at what respondents said their top goals were, they told us that 50% of them told us that their top business goal is to improve operational efficiency. One of the things I've observed as Forrester over a long period of time is that about 10, 15 years ago, we saw a big wave of investment in customer. Forrester called this the age of the customer. We coined that term around 2012. We saw a whole wave of tech modernization happening in front office, customer-facing tech like CRM. But a lot of times the back office systems, these finance and operations related systems, didn't get that same attention. I know from many of the clients I'm working with, this is the first moment where they are really putting that attention on operations. And sure enough, the survey found that as well. And then the other thing we found in this study, very high percentage, more than 2/3, said that effective spend management is either critical or important to improving operational efficiency. And again, spend management, it is direct dollars that are being spent, but it also often correlates with activities. And as companies get more specific and more sophisticated around what that spend is driving and how it's linked to different business outcomes that they're trying to achieve, it can become a very powerful tool in making those right business decisions. And we heard a lot about that in this study. Let me move ahead and now talk a little bit more directly about spend management and what we found in this study. A high percentage of respondents said that managing spend for a global workforce was a challenge. Likewise, we found that there were a high percentage struggling with managing spend when there's hybrid and remote work. And we also found that the requirements of doing business globally presented challenges. Many of you, I'm sure, can relate to these, and there's been a lot of change in recent years. We went from years of COVID where there was almost all remote work, except in some, sort of select cases, and very little travel. Now we're in a climate where we're seeing much more business being done in person, and obviously that affects all kinds of spend related to that. We also found in this study that about half of the respondents, 48%, didn't really feel like their technology that they use today was effectively helping them to navigate these challenges that we're facing. So we see there is a gap there. Most every company has to have at least something in place, at least for some critical parts of spend, but oftentimes it's too fragmented or it's not really helping to achieve those business goals that everyone's looking for. Couple quotes that came up in the study. So one of the executives that we spoke with said, for their organization, the forms of expense reports are very different from one country to the next, and so it's difficult simply to keep track. And another keyed in on the idea of productivity, saying that their spend management platform is really holding back productivity. So not just challenges of tracking and measuring and reporting, but obviously much more serious if it's really impacting the business's ability to be successful there. So those are a couple quotes from those interviews that we did. Let me now move ahead to another finding. The respondents felt that if they had a better spend management technology in place, they would be able to overcome some of these obstacles. So 64%, and this was really one of the higher opportunities that was identified, felt that employee satisfaction could be better. That's common because, first of all, any employee who has to deal with submitting any kind of expense certainly wants something that's seamless and easy to use and hassle-free. more and more, we see that people are looking for things that are very automated, have links to their credit cards, have automation to read in receipts, and really reduce the amount of manual work that they're having to do. But also for people like managers or business decision makers, if you have a great tool that can give you those key insights, that generally will drive a better employee experience. We also saw that people felt that these better spend management tools could directly contribute to revenue. Now, some people might think that, is a surprising finding for a spend management tool, but so often we see that companies want to link spend to those business outcomes, like I referenced earlier. And as companies get more sophisticated in how they're able to, at a granular level, look at what they're spending on and what results were achieved, that ultimately can drive those right revenue driving decisions. And again, that idea of ROI, spending maybe a lot on something that's high return versus spending even a tiny bit on something that's maybe not driving those right business outcomes. And the more detail that people have about that, the more insights they can get, of course, the better they can steer the business into those right revenue opportunities. And then we also saw a pretty high percentage of respondents thought that they would be able to have better operational efficiency and productivity. And again, on all those different levels, individuals who have certain kinds of spend, approvals, managers trying to look at broader insights, even the top executives in a company really wanting to look at the overall picture across the whole firm. And then we did survey specifically about the plans to invest in technology here in the coming 12 months from when the survey was done. And nearly 2/3 of people said that they would be increasing spend. That's consistent with the theme I talked about earlier, that there's this, interest and demand now for investing in finance and operations type elements. And that came through in this study as well. Okay, so a couple more quotes that came through. One was, and this really focuses on the outcomes. One felt that because of a better spend management platform, they were able to save 5 hours per week tracking down expenses. Obviously, the bigger of a company you are, the bigger that kind of an opportunity can be. And another executive that we spoke with out of the UK was talking about how they have an all-in-one portal that can really provide those real-time insights into the employee spending. They also felt that was helping them protect against fraud, obviously something that's very much on everyone's minds, especially as fraud schemes are getting much more sophisticated, and we're hearing about those in the news pretty much every day. So that was an interesting finding as well, that a great spend management tool could also be a key or a clue to really detecting fraud a bit earlier. So wanted to move into one last finding, sort of thinking a little bit more broadly about this idea of the future of spend management and where this is all going. What we're seeing, of course, there's a lot of, I'll call it low-hanging fruit that can be achieved just through better spend visibility, more simplified global processes, better tracking, better ability to identify issues and have better visibility. But this can really make a big impact into real-time agile business operations. Some people might think of spend management as very tactical, but if you think about the power it has to give you that insight into really what's going on in the business, it can be much more powerful than that. We also see that it's starting to connect more and more with the idea of these global business networks. Most companies, they operate with partners, maybe even with customers directly engaging with them in an electronic and automated way, of course, employees. And when you really look at the power of spend management to connect those different groups and how automation is ever growing, that can also be a very powerful shift. And then finally, big theme of the last 12 months for sure, AI, and spend management is no exception. That's been one of the hottest areas of our client base, asking Forrester about how will AI impact, you name it, every area of technology. And AI has a lot of very powerful opportunities, not only to do more sophisticated predictive analytics. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of AI used for things like computer vision, scanning of receipts and things like that already. But AI can also be very, very powerful in terms of detecting some of those other things like fraud or other things that we found in the study. Okay, so before I turn it back over to Michael, let me just leave you with a few recommendations from Forrester. One of the findings in the study, and I didn't talk too much about it here, is that we found that some organizations actually had features, but they weren't fully unlocking them. So one recommendation is to make sure when you go through selecting your right spend management platform, don't only think about features that exist, but make sure you are thinking about how will we use them. That's an all too common issue for technology, that you might have the greatest platform ever, but you haven't really thought through the change management. Commonly, we hear that's the biggest hurdle for organizations. So we advise to really prioritize that early, often, and everywhere when you're moving and trying to change the way that business is done. Second recommendation is around AI. Lately, generative AI has, of course, gotten a lot of hype and attention, but there are all sorts of types of AI. Some are relatively unseen. There are lots of very powerful ways that AI is changing the way that we do work, changing the types of work that we do, and spend management is no exception to that. So be open-minded, and we're often encouraging our clients to really look at use cases or look at what others are doing to inspire their organizations into how AI might be able to benefit them. And then finally, and I alluded to this earlier when I talked about the power of spend management in terms of revenue growth and overall cost control, great spend management can take the organization to new heights if it's integrated into other things. If you can link it to, let's say, your revenue, the sales, if the more you can actually connect what's going on with spend to what the business is doing, the more powerful that it gets over time. So that's another finding and recommendation from us. Okay, well, Michael, with that, why don't I turn it back over to you, and you can pick it up from here.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's really interesting to hear these highlights from the report. So definitely interesting from perspective of what is the buying criteria today. And I heard you say a few things that are quite interesting. So I'm going to have Erica join me as well. I just want to correct for the record, Erica is a VP of product at Brex. So I misspoke, and the slides also misspoke. So with that, I think want to talk a little bit about kind of what I heard from an actual Brex perspective that Liz mentioned. One, as folks know, the way that people are working has really changed post-pandemic. And so as a result, global hiring has become much more commonplace. It used to be, prior to the pandemic, the most frequent times a company would open an office globally is because they wanted to earn revenue in some foreign geography. But now, oftentimes, people are seeing the cost advantages of hiring globally. And that means that even companies that aren't necessarily ready to open an office for revenue or to tackle that market from a go-to-market perspective, they're doing that from an employment perspective. And so the number of offices that are remote and in foreign countries is way more numerous, and it's also happening much earlier in company life cycles. That's one. And so as a result, spend management is becoming increasingly difficult and complex to handle all that. And Erica's going to get into some of those details. And you heard from Liz, 69% of people, so almost everybody, is struggling to manage spend for a global workforce. So that's very top of mind for these people. And you have these kind of one-off disjointed solutions that people are using, and that just increases inefficiency and is one of the reasons why the global capabilities of spend management is such an important criteria. And so, as we talked about, what at a highest level, what does global mean? Because I think global is a big word. I think, as we know, as people are working in different ways, they are demanding more of spend management, and spend management is getting more complex. And so when you're operating a global entity or office, right, you are naturally working in multi-currency. And so multi-currency support for reimbursement and payments is important. That tracking is one, and ERP integration is another. And so, Erica, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the details.
Yeah, and the reason, as Michael mentioned, this is a critical buying criteria. We can probably move to the next slide, or I can request that. Yep. The reason this is a critical buying criteria is the existing infrastructure that customers use is both really complex and requires a lot of manual overhead to maintain. So traditionally, customers are working with multiple providers by region, and they spend a lot of time getting money into the right place or just using those multiple providers all kind of integrated just manually on their back end, switching tabs and so on, and repeating a lot of the same criteria, right? So and so should have this limit, and this is our approval flow, and repeating that across a number of different pieces of their financial tech stack in order to replicate what would be, whatever's happening in their main market or what they want to happen across markets. And this compounds, right, when we think about spend management. So using different providers by country means that each country has a different need, right? Each country, the reason you're doing that is each country has its own sort of unique money flows or unique tax criteria. So for VAT in Europe or local bank connections in Brazil and the Philippines, all with their own compliance requirements, identity requirements, bank requirements, et cetera. That puts this extra burden on controllers and FP&A teams to reconcile those expenses and planning outside of the individual system they're using for that market. And at Brex, what we've seen this manifest into teams that really force employees to have different payment structures just to accommodate how they're operating and how their financial partners can really give them what they need. So you might see employees that get pushed into a reimbursement product versus cards, not because the company doesn't want them to have cards, but because their corporate card doesn't work very well in Europe or LATAM, and they don't want to have another corporate card in that region, or having different local approvals to accommodate having that regional card in Europe or Israel because the domestic team may not have access to that bank account or may not even be able to read the language that bank account is in. So, and this has happened with Brex even before we had our global offering. We had teams in in Israel and in Canada where, taking the Canadian team, for example, we would give them a limit or a spend stipend in US dollars, but they're spending primarily in Canadian dollars. So that's really painful for them to have to go and, pull out the calculator and see, hey, what's my exchange rate? How much money do I have left on this limit to go use? So when we thought about what we wanted to offer and just looking at, what are the problems that we had, we just talked through, what we wanted to offer when we built Brex's global infrastructure is really give teams the opportunity to do things in one place, right? So instead of asking them to have multiple providers and doing everything outside of their software, what we wanted to do is say, hey, what if you could give everything on one platform with all the benefits of global money movement, but with the added benefit of being able to operate locally. So spending those global dollars, but operating as a local team, using the benefits that come with, having that global distributed team and acquiring talent anywhere in the world that it might exist. And so what we did is say, okay, all of this should exist on a single platform, but we're going to need local issuance in order to have those cards get accepted maximally around the world. And we want customers to be able to pay us out of their, local bank account so that they don't have to have FX drag along the way where they're moving money internationally just to pay a credit card bill, right? We want them to have the ability that they look for in operating locally and spending locally, where their constant currency, both for where they're spending and how they're operating. And then similarly for reimbursements, giving them the ability to pay their employees directly into their local bank account, not having to wait 2-3 weeks, a month, even depending on what the payment period is globally, but giving them the ability to pay their employees same day or next day, where they don't have to, expect the employee to carry, thousands of dollars of cost just because their payroll happens to be once a month. So there's a huge amount of benefits that come from putting this on a single platform, and also modernizing the money flows that you're not sort of tacking on global to, what else already exists, for example, your payroll or your domestic card. And I'll give an anecdote. Actually, one of the first customers that we had on our global platform is a company called Lemonade, and they're a public company with a huge team in the Netherlands, a team in the US, other teams in North America and Europe, Israel, et cetera. And what they wanted to do is consolidate their offering. They were doing a lot of things in the US that didn't make sense to do in the US, but they didn't have a platform that they could use. And so they put everything actually on Brex and now have local cards issued in their global regions, meaning that Brex is actually able to give them cards to those teams directly. Those teams can spend and see that spend in one currency and then pay us back in that same currency. So they're not worried about, okay, well, if I spent in euros and I have to pay Brex back in dollars, what does that mean? They're spending in euros, they're paying us back in euros. And they can look at all of this in one place on Brex's platform where they can apply policies consistently. So everyone gets the same approval flows, right? They're not creating these random approval flows just based on where someone happens to exist globally, but instead based on their management team and hierarchy, as well as making sure that policies can be distributed consistently across their organization, right? So if they want everyone to have a Uber stipend or everyone to spend in a certain way for travel, they can apply that globally to their entire team because everyone gets to be on the same platform on Brex.
Definitely.
And I mentioned a little bit about FX, but ultimately the end result of having everything in one place and allowing companies to operate in a constant currency gives them the ability to avoid any cross-border FX fees or really the need to move money around just for the sake of paying a bill, right? They want to have the team, in Japan, operating out of Japan, spending Japanese yen out of their Japanese bank account. All of that is great, and we can facilitate that on Brex's platform without requiring them to, go move money to the US in order to pay us. This manifests also back into the expense management and the ERP, where we're, administering this all through the ERP link, and it's all, not required to exist with multiple interactions and implementations to your ERP. It's just one implementation, and it allows you to close your books a lot faster with everything being on one system. And I'll hand it back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I think super helpful, Erica, to hear more of the details about how this works for global organizations. I think from the perspective and vantage point of a CFO, I think when you're thinking about your organization, especially if it's global or it might be global in the future, it's super important that you are thinking about all of the systems that work across your HR and finance stack and really everywhere, right? And software by its nature, outside of financial services just works globally and people don't think about it. But financial services, for all of the reasons that Erica highlighted, right? Foreign exchange, foreign currency, multi-entity, KYC, and know your customer onboarding, right? The reality is there are very few financial products that work seamlessly across countries, and that's very different than software, which is like infinitely scalable. And so Brex, in particular, because of this criteria that Liz walked through and how important this is and the way people are working, spend a ton of time to try to make this seamless and add global adaptability to one of the reasons why, people use us. I think similarly, which is a super hot topic, not totally related to the global topic, is also AI, but it gets into the overall mandate from finance organizations, which is always do more with less and make sure that your software and solutions do more for you. It's rare that you have a accounting or finance team that is staffed with a ton of internal software developers, engineers that are going to build products for you, right? Where we as an organization in the finance and accounting organizations are often not the priority, right? Revenue is the priority, and that makes sense. And so we need our vendors to be offering these products for us because internal teams aren't dedicating resources here. And so it is this global adaptability, it is AI automation, it's the customization nature that all bring this positive employee experience and also the positive experience in managing the software, right? And so that way you can just not have to spend time reconciling spreadsheets, building out manual processes that slow down your ability to do important and critical financial processes within the company. And so, yeah, so Brex, just to close before we move to Q&A, we offer a variety of products, and most notably our corporate spend management, which is kind of expense management and card across one platform that makes global in particular very, very easy to implement and manage. And then, you know, that works across travel, bill pay, our business banking accounts, you know, with a bunch of really cool AI features. So it's been great to kind of dive into the global infrastructure in particular on this call, but lots to offer there. So with that, I'm going to take a look at some of the Q&A and sort of field some of those. Thank you, Liz, for rejoining. I think one question that I see for you is, if someone comes to you asking for guidance on expense management, when does global enter the conversation? In other words, how big of a priority is global spend from your point of view? You're on mute.
Still on mute. How about now?
Sorry, there you go.
Yeah, I'll answer it from a few different perspectives. So first of all, I work for Forrester, so most of our clients are global. You know, one thing I would point out is that a lot of the choices, it's not just about global, it's also about your specific country needs. You know, we often say global to mean multi-country, but there are also companies I work with where even if they're just in one or a couple countries or some region, you know, you can't necessarily assume a US-based solution is a great fit. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other key thing, though, we work on with our clients is thinking about the longer term, the bigger picture, and future flexibilities. So we talked about things like if you're going to be linking to other parties, if there might be other parties involved in your spend ecosystem. We talked about growing your business. Maybe you're not global today, but you might want to be. Now, there may be some specific types of entities, maybe in some cases like a state and local government, maybe most of their spend is fairly localized and it may be a lower priority. So I would answer it that way. I mean, obviously, if you're global, it's going to be a high priority. If you have ambitions to grow and become more global, should be a pretty high priority. But really make sure that you're not making a short-term decision, because these are the kinds of platforms you don't want to be ripping and replacing often. So, you know, we always encourage our clients to think out the next several years and not just make a decision based on your needs of today.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Seeing another question, this one's maybe a good one for Erica. Aren't most credit cards global because they use Visa or MasterCard? Why is Brex different?
That is a great question. And that is the truth. I mean, Visa and MasterCard have a great network, but the reality is that they are not actually universally accepted everywhere. And a lot of companies at the you know, a lot of corporate cards are also on Amex, which is a different network. It's not on the Visa MasterCard network. Brex is on the MasterCard network, which has much better global acceptance than Visa and then Amex. And actually, Brex uniquely has done a lot of work with merchants globally to have acceptance that extends beyond just the standard MasterCard program. So we've gone into places like Brazil and worked directly with merchants to be able to make sure that approval for our cards is even higher than the standard network approval rates. The reason for this, just to get a little bit technical for you, is in each country, there are different bins and issuers. So there's a thing called local issued bins, which means that your credit card is issued from a bank that's based in that country. And typically, approval rates for cards in each country are higher when they are on a card that was issued out of a bank or out of a bin, bank identifying number, that's from that country. That's usually around fraud, but can also be related to the fees and charges that the merchants might need to pay. And so Brex does local issuing, meaning we have local bins around the world, allowing us to know that we have very, very high local equivalent acceptance beyond just the acceptance that you would get as a standard user of a US domiciled card.
Thank you. Another one that's probably for you, some of these are detailed, sorry. So is VAT tracking available today in Brex? Do you use a third-party partner for that? Today we use Concur and have to track and reclaim VAT which VAT or VAT, sorry, through an external party, and we still had to manually calculate how much tax was paid on each transaction.
We do have that available. I won't speak directly to Concur's offering, but we do have a Brex offering of VAT tracking in our Empower Brex Plus product. So happy to share more about that, but it does track the individual VAT paid and allow you to export that for reclaiming, and also just track that in your GL. So you can separate out what was paid for taxes versus what was paid for the actual expense.
Got it. Well, I know we're close up on time, so it was helpful to hear. And I'll just add one thing, Erica, to you is also, on the Visa MasterCard point, of course, they don't necessarily facilitate the global local collections or card shipment in those countries either. So,
Great point.
but yes, so I want to thank everyone for joining today. I want to thank Liz and the Forrester team as well for their helpful insights, and we look forward to distributing that copy of the Forrester study, The Future of Spend Management. So thank you very much.